you have an incoming exam in 15 days and you haven't studied shit. I'll help you study. Well, a few days ago, I gave my biology exam. Well, I didn't study. Well, I completed the class 12th biology syllabus in 15 days. Here's how I did it. Why would somebody be in a position where he has to complete the whole syllabus in 15 days, right? Well, I had a situation. So most of you would be asking me, why would somebody do that? And to that, I answer procrastination. So basically, I didn't study any biology for the whole year basically and just focus on math because I wanted to give JEE at the end of the day. But at the same time, I used the biology lectures to roam around and mess around, right? Eventually, I was in a position where I had to finish the entire syllabus in 15 days without actually studying. So now that you have the background, now let's look into how I did it. So your best friend is going to be the NCRT, right? NCRT is the basis of the exam. The exam is set up on NCRT. So, the first thing I did was read all the lessons. Yeah, there were more or less 15 lessons. And yeah, I took 7 days to read all those lessons and, really read all those lessons and understand all those lessons. Okay, let's take the example biotechnology. There are two lessons, right? First is the principles of biotechnology, and then there's application of biotech. So, in first reading, I just read the whole chapter. I didn't do anything. I just read it as is, trying to understand whatever things are going on. And then I take my highlighter and go back. Basically, I just highlight the whole book, right? And I know you're not supposed to do that, but but it's the process of active and passive reading. So first one was passive, right? But that stays in the back of your head, right? Because I read this, okay. And then the second time I'm actively reading that because I have to underline that, right? So both things were being done. So that's how I actually read the lessons, right? And 15 lessons took me 7 days to complete, right? So I started preparing on 12th of March and my exam was on 27th, right? And till 19th March, I was just reading the book, right? And well, if you really count it, I read the book twice, once reading and once highlighting. So basically, now that I had read all the books, I had some fundamental things, right? I knew what things where I may not be knowing the exact things, but I generally knew what. And now that I have read all the content in the book twice, technically, now I had to make notes. And here we are. These are all my notes for biology. I have 8 days remaining and I have to study everything, right? I have to finish everything and remember everything. And well, note making was not the most difficult part. It was, I think, the easiest part of the whole process, right? And so I'll show you the notes, right? These are the notes you can see. Okay, for example, this is biotechnology notes, right? You can see this page and applications too, right? So basically, let's take an example how I made my notes, right? So basically, the NCRT has certain points, right? For example, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and there are sub points below that. So basically, what I did was write the headings down, and from the paragraph, I took 3 points or whatever, how many points I required, and just went through the entire book like this and made my notes, right? And then once I had made my notes, it took me 5 days to make my notes, right? So I ended on 18. On 22nd of March, I completed my note making process. So basically now I had memorized most of the things and most of the things were very clear, right? At this point, I was having enough knowledge that I will pass. And around 75% marks which are required for JEE, I will probably get those 75 marks. But I had to be safe to get 90%. Maybe. So what did I do then? So basically what I did was, let me bring out my notes again. So you see, I have highlighted shit. So basically, blue highlighter again. I highlighted it again. Well, this is the second time I'm going over my material again. Right? Once I was reading, now when I've made notes. Now, after highlighting the second time, I make sure that I remember everything. Right? It's ingrained in my mind now. So basically, after that, I did nothing. Okay, I went around and hung out with my friends, and the day before exams, I looked at some questions, the previous year questions from the internet, right? So basically, what type of questions came in the exam, and I went and gave the exam. So the process to learn anything and everything you want, any subject you want, is basically boiled down to three steps. First is reading the material, second is making the notes, and third is practice. This generally doesn't apply to, a whole year. This is very short. But if you want to take this long term, for example, if you're preparing for the JEE and you're having trouble studying chemistry, for example, right? This can be done too, right? You can have phases, a month long phases where you can, do this process again and again. Not quite to the extent I have done, I have shown, right? So basically, let's take an example. If you want to study chemistry, and let's take a month, let's say November, right? And in 2 months' time, you have to give your JEE. So what would I do? First of all, I would divide it into lessons. Let's say organic chemistry, right? So I'll read the NCRT, I read the material which my coaching or anything has given me. I'll take a blank page, and note down all the main points I've gotten. Or if you have already made the notes, just take a paper and jot down all the points you've taken from that lesson, right? And then next, the third preparation step is whatever question solving and pattern recognition you can do is just do that, right? And ideally, when you're preparing for JEE, this preparation stage is 75% of the work, right? So basically, if you're doing organic chemistry, right, take a day for reading, a day for note making, and 3 days for practice. And you can do this in stages, right? It's very easy.